First of all, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this project of oral histories of Latinos in Ohio. Today is Wednesday, August 26th, 2020. Can we start with your full name, please?
So my full maiden name is Belkis Angelina Sanchez Ortiz.
Okay.
Since I've been married, it is now Belkis Clark.
Okay. Tell me where you grew up and where you were born.
Okay, so I was born in Jamaica, Queens, New York. My family, my parents immigrated from Dominican Republic to Queens in late 70s, early 80s. And so I was born there. That's where a lot of my family had established roots. And then my grandfather, my mom's dad at the time, decided, okay, well, now we're going to all move to Florida. And he started some bodegas and supermarkets there. And when I was about, I want to say 6 or 7 years old, we were living in Florida. My parents decided to retire. And to them, retiring was returning back to their home country. So we moved to Santo Domingo in, I want to say, early 2000. And that's where I did the rest of my schooling, middle school, high school. My sister did primarily all her schooling there. So we lived in Santo Domingo. That's where we were raised. And when we were children, we were familiar with the country already because our parents really instilled a lot of patriotism in us. But they would also send us to Dominican Republic for the summers. So we'd stay with our aunt and we'd be in, the small town where they grew up, in a house that my dad probably stayed in when he was my age. So it was really, really interesting to have that sort of experience as a child.
What kind of things? So before you moved in there, for a while to complete some schooling, tell me about that going back and forth between the U.S. and the Dominican Republic. What kind of things did you get to do in the summers? And just tell me about that.
Well, it was sort of confusing for me at first as a child, just because it was like, okay, we're getting shipped off. It was almost like camp at first. Like, oh, okay, this is where we're going to stay. And so we would stay with my dad's sister. And they lived in sort of a middle-class house in Dominican Republic. And just to kind of give you some context, it was the electricity would go out very often. Sometimes we wouldn't have running water, so we would have to just make our fun. And having been in the U.S. where it's like, okay, go to your bike or go to the park or here watch TV, we didn't necessarily always have that in the summers in DR. So we had to make our own fun, and it forced us to be sort of innovative. But it was also nice because it really gave us that ability to like latch on to our culture. At the same time, it was confusing because my aunt's family, her husband, is of a darker complexion than me. And so even though both of my parents are born in Dominican Republic and raised, I got the question, y esta gringa, y what do you do? Oh, she doesn't speak any Spanish, this and that. Like, oh, no mande la gringa, que ella no va a saber qué hacer. So I had to almost prove my Dominicanness to my own family and to other people. And then when I'd come back to the States, I had to prove my Americanness to people. So it was like, that es la frase ni de aquí ni de allá. That started very early for me. But I think my parents were really good about saying, you're from both. Tú eres de los dos sitios. you're Dominican and American, and sort of trying to have us embrace those identities.
So you said you have a sister? You have brothers and sisters or just a sister?
I just have one sister. She's 2.5 years younger than me.
Okay. Tell me about what kind of activities did you do together as siblings, as sisters growing up?
We fought a lot. But we also, I kind of the typical things, the little kid games, but we also had them in Spanish versions. So what was interesting was we had our version of tag, or we had our version of like Red Rover. So we play it with our American friends and our only English-speaking friends, and then we'd learn it again in Spanish. And what's funny is it's the same game, but all the rules were different, or they'd call things differently. Also, we really danced a lot when we were younger. That was instilled in us a lot. Just turning on the music and, dancing and making that your fun, because sometimes we might not have TV for a couple hours if the electricity's out, but You might have a radio that has batteries in it.
Right.
When we were in Dominican Republic, we spent more time outside. I remember that very distinctively. My grandfather had a lot of property, so plantain trees, mango trees, and everything, and so that was our playground. So we got to hunt spiders and pick un mango like right off the tree and just eat it right then and there, and it was amazing. And then it was just always kind of a culture shock coming back and forth. It's like, oh yeah, no, I can't do that when I'm in Florida, or now I can't do that when I'm in Dominican Republic.
Right. What did your parents do?
So my father owned a series of like grocery stores, so he was just an independent entrepreneur.
You said bodegas.
Bodegas, yes,
so
bodegas.
It was Dominican products or Latino products?
Latino products. So his bodega in Queens, it was primarily in a Dominican neighborhood. So it was sort of that traditional sort of bodega that you think of when you think New York. In Florida, he actually made it a little bit larger, and he actually introduced a butcher shop and a lunch service counter. So what he wanted to do was make it sort of like a one-stop shop in the neighborhood in Florida where we lived, for every Latin American sort of community to come. And what's interesting was that led to like other like Americans just coming in, and like everything's in Spanish, but they were like, oh, well, this is a popular store and they have what I need. So he named the second one La Placita Latina. And then my grandfather opened one shortly after. He opened one in Florida, and he named it La Placita Latina número 2.
Yeah. Were you part of that? Like, do you remember going to the stores? And
I actually, one of my earliest memories of me and my sister is when my parents were opening up the bodega in Florida. They opened it from the ground up. Both of them, and some of my dad's friends, like waxing the floors themselves, doing everything themselves. So I remember sleeping on like a little blanket just in the middle of this empty grocery store that only has empty aisles. And I remember as a kid too, La Bodega kind of became our playground, like my grandfather's and my dad's. So we'd walk in and they'd immediately know, like, oh, esas son las hijas de Mello. That's my dad's a twin, so they call him Mello. Esas son las hijas de Mello. So we'd go around and like, okay, so we're going to play with these things, and maybe I want this bag of chips. But my dad also made it very clear that like anyone that works in this store has the ability to tell you no as well. So it was almost like a babysitter. La Bodega became a babysitter, and everyone else in there too.
A family.
Yeah, no, really. I mean, yeah, like there are still people that my dad worked with that I see now, actually, when I go to Florida to visit them, and they tell me, oh, I helped you when you were a little girl. And I'm like, thank you. I appreciate it.
Right. So did your mom just worked in the bodega also?
So when we lived in New York, my mom was actually a phlebotomist. And then she decided that when I was born, she was just going to become a stay-at-home mom. And she basically was right there alongside my dad in opening the bodega. My father's English is not as fluent as he would like. He practices a lot at it, but at that time he wasn't super confident in it. So my mother did a lot of the translation and paperwork. And, if there was something that she couldn't understand, then it was, my job to also like sort of step in and try and help him figure it out.
Okay. So, I mean, your parents had you fully immersed in the Latino culture and the Dominican culture, both by, by the type of work that they did or businesses they had, but also going to the Dominican Republic. What do you remember distinctly about sort of being part of you as Dominican in terms of traditions or maybe foods or something like that?
Well, up until college, I pretty much ate rice and beans probably like every day, to be perfectly honest. That was just, the culture was so ingrained in both of my parents and sort of our everyday lives that it never really became sort of like a thing. It was just like, okay, this is arroz con habichuela, carne molida, whatever, aguacate, that's what we're going to do. But it was interesting as I kind of got older, because I started to notice that other people only identified me as either or. So they did a lot to immerse us in the culture, but they also wanted us to have both sides. So when we moved to the States, when we moved to Dominican Republic, we still celebrated Thanksgiving. We still had Halloween, even though that's not a thing there. And when we lived in the States, we had, we did El Día de los Tres Reyes for Christmas instead of actually getting presents on Christmas. We also, El 27 de Febrero is the Independence Day for Dominican Republic. So we'd always celebrate or do something there. In Dominican Republic, too, it's a primarily Catholic country. So our spring break is always during the week of Semana Santa. And we would always have our traditions that we would do during Semana Santa. And that just kind of, even though now as I'm older and I would say re-Americanized, some of those traditions I haven't quite kept them up, but it's still sort of that like, okay, well, let me just try and do something and like continue that practice.
Great. Tell me, so you obviously grew up with both languages, with Spanish and English. What would you consider your first language?
This is an interesting question because I remember learning both at the same time. So it's hard for me to say either or, because sometimes I do think in Spanish. Like even having conversations at work where I'm speaking mostly English because of the nature of what I'm doing, I still find myself thinking in Spanish. Because what I've noticed is like now at 30, I use both of those vocabularies. So for me, it's like interchanging it. And my husband asks me this question all the time too. He's like, when you're doing a certain task, do you tend to think in one language or the other? And I've realized that when I do a lot more technical tasks, like if I'm doing something like very, very specific and detailed, I tend to think in English. And a lot of the time when I'm doing math, I tend to count in Spanish. And it makes no sense.
So you said something interesting about the language with your parents too. How so sort of you became a part of helping them navigate when they needed to the language, right, the English and things like that. Tell me about that experience. What was it like? And were there any moments where your parents maybe experienced, I don't know, something discriminatory because of either their accent or their, language, English language ability or something like that?
Yeah, unfortunately it did happen. The discriminatory practices, that happened a lot, almost to a point where it kind of became expected for me as a child, like in certain places and situations. So with my parents, it was an interesting dynamic because my father's English was not very confident in it. He could understand it. I could speak to him in English and he would respond to me in Spanish. But he was very, very self-conscious about how he sounded because as he was learning English, he had a lot of negative experiences with people. So that really kind of put him in a shell. And so with us, he wanted us to be fluent in both. He's like, I don't want you to feel how I felt when I was learning this. As a result of that, my mom and I had to step in sort of a lot. And we still do, and it's just kind of something we don't think about. So if we go to a restaurant and he's reading the menu in English, he'll understand it, but he may not feel comfortable ordering. So for us, it's just become such second nature to order for him. With my mom, it's a little different. Her fluency is better, but she has gotten negative comments about her accent. And so sometimes I've noticed, even if me or my sister make just like a friendly jab, she'll speak in Spanish maybe for the rest of the conversation. As a kid, watching that happen to them, it was rough. Because I knew in my head, no, they know English. Like, what are you talking about? I'm just helping them. And to other people, I think it came off as, they don't know what they're doing. They have their kid translating for them. Whereas that was that was normal for us growing up. Like I would, to this day, I still translate for my grandmother. And when my grandfather was alive, I would too. And for me, I became very defensive. I became very, very defensive and protective of that with my sister and my parents. and extended family, but I also think I got to a point where I got a little too defensive and aggressive about it. Whereas even if someone sort of made a comment completely, innocent, I would take it as, well, they must be making fun of how I speak, or they must be making fun of how I talk. And to this day, it's still something that's kind of a little sensitive for me, because I will hear people tell me, "Oh, you don't have an accent at all," and it's like, well, what am I supposed to sound like? And it's, I remember one experience specifically with my dad, where he's a very sort of, he plays his emotions close to his chest. And I remember a neighbor of ours, when we still lived in Florida, the trash people let like a glass jar or something fall on the ground, and it fell in front of our neighbor's house. So he thought that we had thrown something or whatnot. And the neighbor came out while me and my sister were playing, and my dad was washing the car. And he came out and he said, "You dirty ass spick, how dare you throw your trash on my lawn?" And at that point, I didn't know what the word spick meant. I was like, why is he yelling at my dad? What's going on? And my father, very quickly, his demeanor changed. He became very protective and, confronted our neighbor. And after that, it was very tense. It was like, we don't talk to them. We don't interact with people. And unfortunately, I think that kind of proved to my dad to continue to act that way. In our neighborhood at the time, it was primarily white, so we didn't really talk to very many people in general, and that sort of experience really put him off to that.
Right. How about you personally? So, what kind of experiences have you had with language, either in English or Spanish, with strangers or with family members?
Well, I mean, with family, I have a lot of family members that aren't as fluent in Spanish as I am. And I've heard other family members say, well, they're not really, ustedes no son dominicanos, no saben hablar español. And I've also heard people criticize the fluency of my Spanish. It's like, oh, tú no sabes hablar español porque tú eres una gringa. And it's like, damned if I do, damned if I don't. Right. So I've just tried to get to a point where I try to educate. Like, I've had people, my own family, go like, you need to relearn Spanish. Okay, well, let's just, before I lose my patience, let's try and sort of like examine the situation. I've also had it happen at work, not at Ohio State, luckily, but at other places that I've worked. I've had people, coworkers, just blatantly ask me like, oh, how did you do that? There's electricity in Dominican Republic, or how did you have a computer? How did you learn English? And I try to take it from a point of just the lack of education and try to educate them. And it's hard, but it's helped me in my defensiveness when I get those sorts of questions. One specific time that I recall was when I moved back to the States to go to college. I went to University of Central Florida. It was like a welcome to college in your dorm, and it was like everyone was trying to get to know each other, and mind you, this is in Florida, so there's a considerable Hispanic population. One of the RAs asked me if it was hard for me to apply to the school because I didn't have a computer. And I said, nope. We have all the stuff you have, we have it all. Like, this is sort of how it works there. And I think they were embarrassed by the question because they didn't realize, like, oh, that's my own ignorance. So I tried to just take it from a teachable moment. But it was just jarring to me because it's like, why am I the only one getting asked that question? Why am I the only person in the room, like, being singled out like this? Like, I've told you all, like, yeah, I speak English. You're hearing me speaking. Right. Like, I have a laptop. You saw me put it in my dorm. It's just, those moments are still very hard for me, but I try to not let them get in my head.
Great. So just a little bit more about the language. So your parents and your family, when you talk to your parents, do you talk to them in Spanish or in English?
Both. It just depends. Like, for example, like my dad called me yesterday for my birthday, and he's, hola, mija, felicidades. Oh, gracias, papi. Thanks. What are you doing? Like, we just kind of sort of flip back and forth. With my dad, since I know he's less comfortable speaking the language, I try to stick to Spanish. But even he sometimes, will respond to me back in English. In his older age, actually, he's gotten more comfortable with the language, so now he almost tries to practice more. But, yeah. It's him with my mom is just Spanglish. It's all around. It's whatever the first word that pops into my head. Same with my sister.
Are they back in Florida?
Yes, they're all back in Florida. So I actually have no family in Ohio. I have my husband's family, but my family lives between Florida, Dominican Republic, and New York.
Tell me about the school years in the Dominican Republic. What was that like? Because you were a teen when you went back. So what was that, transition?
It was interesting because so in Dominican Republic, the public school system is not good at all. So most people in that sort of middle class, upper class group send their children to private school. So I went to a private school that was bilingual. And in most cases, it was just like any other high school. What was different was the size. So my graduating class was only 30 people. And so we really got to know each other. So I think the high school, middle school drama was more heightened. But as far as interactions, I mean, like, the only thing that we don't do there, I guess, is prom. And even now, that's now become popular in high schools there because it's American. And you have a lot of kids of American diplomats or, business people, and they all are like, okay, well, now we want to start having proms. And that's been something. But when I was there, it was just those small sort of like American traditions, but everything else felt the same. I think actually I would have to say I had way more freedom in Dominican Republic.
How so? What do you mean?
I think it was less a worry of things that people tend to worry about in American high schools. Like, school shootings weren't a thing for us. Violence in school wasn't a thing. Like, if people got into a fight, it was a boy fist fight. It wasn't like metal detectors. Things that I was seeing on the news or reading about in American high schools or things that my cousins were experiencing in their high schools because they were still in the U.S. It was way more close-knit, and so we had a little bit more freedom, like, okay, yeah, sure, you guys go out for lunch, come back, that kind of stuff.
Okay, I see. Do you have any special memories about being in... I mean, you graduated from high school, right?
Yes. So I was actually, I was valedictorian too. It was funny, but I think all of my memories are based out of Dominican Republic. I don't know that I could pick just one, because that's home for me. So when people talk about going home, for me, home is my grandfather's house in Bani. And, being out in the trees and just amongst the nature. Like, that's home for me. When I visit my parents, I'm visiting my parents in Florida. I'm not going home.
Right. So tell me about coming to Ohio. What brought you to Ohio? What year did you get here?
Okay. So I got to Ohio in 2016, and it was work. So I was fresh out of graduate school, and I was looking for a position advising in athletics. And I had interviewed a bunch of places, and, things just weren't panning out. And, at 21 with your student loan debt hanging over you, you're kind of like, well, we got to do what we got to do. And what's funny is my dad also really, really pushed me to get out of my comfort zone. He said, go, you've done it once before. You left and you went to school by yourself. Do it again. You can do this. I did it. You are perfectly capable.
Did you go to graduate school in Florida also?
Yes.
Okay.
And they were still living in Dominican Republic at the time. Wow. So they didn't move back until a couple years ago, actually. So to my dad, it was like, this is just what you do as an adult. You leave the nest. You take the leap. And you take a chance. And so to me, it was scary, but with him sort of telling me, like, you've done this already. You got this. I went ahead and they actually drove me from Florida in my beat up little Toyota Corolla with all of my possessions to Bowling Green, Ohio. And I remember looking at them because they had never been in a town like that. They went from New York to Orlando. Like, they've always lived in really big cities. Mm-hmm. They were not used to American rural, like, towns. So to my parents, they were like, there's nothing here. She's going to go crazy. What happens if she has to go to a hospital? Like, they were thinking the worst. They were like, she's not going to have anything here. But they dropped me off, and they said, buena suerte, mija. And then they got in the car, and they turned right back around and drove to Florida. Mm. So after that, I realized, like, okay, well, this is going to be a growing moment for me. Mm-hmm. And I feel like my dad and I bonded even more during that time because he did it. When he left Dominican Republic, he left everyone he ever knew. He left his mom. He left his family. Didn't speak the language and was dropped into a completely foreign place. So he kept me really encouraged and said, like, don't worry, something's going to come along. Just keep grinding and doing what you have to do. And eventually this job at Ohio State opened up, and I was like, well, I don't know if I want to be in Ohio still, but at least this is a big city. And, I can do more than just look at cornfields. And made the move, and Columbus completely caught me by surprise. Like, I had no idea that this was even in Ohio. Mm-hmm. And sort of, as they say, the rest is history. I met my husband and his family, and I really enjoy the Midwest because it reminds me almost of Dominican Republic, like the neighborliness. Mm-hmm. The people try to slow down and, spend more time with family. And I like that. I like that about the Midwest. And I feel like if, we are going to have kids and set up roots, I want to do that in a space like that. Like my parents did, when they got to a point that they were like, okay, we don't want to raise our daughters here anymore. We want to retire. Let's take them to what we know, and what we know is this. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Great. So what were one of your first memories of, like, Ohio? So I know you went to a small town, and then you came here, but what are those first impressions, first memories of it?
Well, one of my first impressions was not good. We were driving into Bowling Green, I remember, and my mom started to cry. And she goes in Spanish, ay, yo no te puedo dejar aquí no hay nada. Aquí no hay nada. I was like, wow, you're right. There really is nothing here. So I think my first impression was just of, like, what did I get myself into? Where am I? Mm-hmm. What is this place? And eventually I started to sort of, like, realize, oh, okay, college town sort of feel, and then really got to know a lot of people. Like, I became really good friends with another advisor on campus and some faculty even, because it was such a close-knit community. And I really did enjoy that about Bowling Green. So eventually my impression changed from, there's nothing here to do, it's in the middle of nowhere, to, this is a town, it just wants to be a community where people thrive and everyone wants to help each other. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then moving to Columbus was
a little bit even more comforting, because it's like, okay, there are things to do here. If we need to take our dog to a boarding house so we can go somewhere for the weekend, we can find that. And for me, that was also important, because I realized when I was in Bowling Green and there was nothing to do, I wasn't used to that. Because even in Dominican Republic, there was stuff to do.
Right.
It was just different. And I realized in Columbus, I was like, this is where I belong. Like, this is sort of the sweet spot for me, where everything kind of converges. Mm-hmm.
So now, Belkis, you're building your own life here. You've been in Ohio for years now, and you're married. How do you try to keep connected to your Dominican heritage?
Food. I cook a lot for my husband. He is American, white, from Youngstown, Ohio. But he's very worldly, I guess is the word that I would use to describe. He's very interested in other cultures and things. And this is aside from us being in a relationship. Mm-hmm. So I try to do things to show him, like, this is what I ate as a kid. Mm-hmm. This is what I listened to as a kid. So unfortunately for him, that means on Sundays I put on Johnny Ventura at like 8 a.m. and start cleaning. But I've noticed it inspires sort of curiosity in him. So it's like, well, tell me, like, what is this about? How do you make this dish? What is this song? And even just talking about it, like, I think he wants to move back to Dominican Republic more than my parents did, because that's the sort of life that he wants for us as we get older too. And just trying to maintain a sense of connection to my country. So reading about what's going on in Dominican Republic and staying up on the news and just checking in with family there too.
Has he been to the Dominican?
Not yet. He wants to go. So the plan was for us to go this summer. But yeah.
Of course.
But
so that leads me to my next question. So we are in the middle of a pandemic. We're still in summer 2020, and you know, we're trying to figure out how our life is going to be. And could you tell me about some of the first things that you thought and how your life changed when you learned about the virus, and then we went into lockdown and all of those things?
Yeah. I think my biggest concern was, when am I going to be able to visit my family again safely? Because travel is the only way. That was my biggest concern, sort of that family time, because I try to see them about 3 or 4 times a year. Wherever, either Florida or if we're meeting up at a mutual place for vacation. But that was my first concern. And then immediately after was my country. You know, what's going to happen in Dominican Republic? If this is the United States and this is the sort of crisis that we're facing, what does a third world country with limited resources, not necessarily the most stable and reliable government, do? And so a lot of my concern has been checking in with family that still live in Dominican Republic and making sure that they're staying safe and that they're, you know, being protected and that they have what they need. And what's funny is they are almost more comfortable going places because everyone there wears a mask. Everyone there wears a mask, which I thought was interesting compared to the United States.
Our freedom.
And Dominicans are very patriotic, and that sentiment is very popular there too, which is why I was very curious to see, like, everyone's wearing a mask, almost like if we do this together that we can get over it and we can live our lives again.
So there's maybe a stronger sense of community there.
I think so.
Responsabilidad a la comunidad.
Exacto.
Who in your family has been most impacted by the pandemic?
My mom currently has COVID. My sister also has COVID. My mother was symptomatic. So she's actually getting over her bed rest period. She didn't have any sort of issues with her breathing, thank goodness. My sister is asymptomatic, and she's been helping care for my mother. And apparently she has had it as long as she has, but has shown no symptoms. My father's still been out working. He was considered essential because he worked food chain supply. So he has been out working as if nothing has happened. And I think they're the most impacted at the moment. I also have an aunt who probably also likely has it, and a cousin. They probably got it from working. They're not in a position where they could stay home. They had to go out and work. So it's been rough because it's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. And now you have it, and now you can't work. So at the end of the day, the worst case scenario has still happened. So a lot of concern for them as far as making sure that they're taken care of financially and emotionally. And it's rough to have to monitor that from afar, but also having the role sort of switch, because now it's the daughter or the niece checking up on the adults.
Aside from not being able to see your family and travel, has your life, or did your life change in any way initially? I know now we're sort of finding ways to, do things with precautions, but how did your life change initially when we went into lockdown and all of those regulations that we had?
it was a lot of adapting for me because I'm very type A. So the control freak in me was like, I can't control any of this. So it was learning to deal with my anxiety and that uncertainty in different ways. So either being more active physically or doing things around the house. I mean, excuse me, luckily the timing kind of worked out perfectly as far as a distraction. My husband and I bought a house right when this started. And so we've had sort of the moving and the settling in to keep us distracted. But I've tried to really sort of mellow out and understand that there's a lot that is uncertain and that if I continue to sort of worry and worry and worry, I'm just going to drive myself insane.
Right. Did you experience, or people around you, did you see any maybe family member experiencing particular difficulty because of being isolated or having to be isolated from other family members, maybe feeling anxious or depressed or something like that?
My grandmother has struggled with this a lot. I think it's a combination.
And she's in the Dominican.
She's actually in Florida. My grandfather died a year ago. And so up until then, they were living in Dominican Republic. But now that she is by herself, she lives with my aunt in Florida. And so she has always been used to a house full of people and people in and out and people calling and, you know, there's always something to do, someone to take care of. And now, you know, she's lost my grandfather and no one comes over because we're socially distancing. And that's been a difficulty for her, is she feels very isolated socially. And even, you know, if before the most that she did socially was go to the store, like, now she feels like that's been taken away from me. And it's been really hard for her to try and feel like the FaceTime and the phone calls makes up for it.
Yeah, I know the older Latino population has felt it.
Yes.
Even more. Do you feel that the government, like our government here in Ohio, has done a good job of handling this situation and providing resource and information for the immigrant community, specifically, maybe Spanish speaking?
To be honest, I don't think so. I'm not aware of any sort of resources geared specifically towards immigrants offered during this time, but I'm not unused to that. I feel like that we tend to be sort of an afterthought in a lot of situations, which is unfortunate, but I think now is the time where we really need, like, the government needs to step up and do something, especially in the light of recent social injustice movements. You know, it's sort of, to me, it goes hand in hand. Like, we need to fight for the rights of everyone. And unfortunately, I think sometimes as a group, immigrants, be it Latino or from other countries, we tend to get forgotten.
Okay. How do you feel, so I know you work here at Ohio State and you work with a specific group of population students. How do you see the pandemic affecting the people that you work with more closely?
I think it's going to be a very trying time for students because now they've been sort of thrust into growing up very quickly, very fast. Granted, you are in college, but I think the level of maturity that the world is in right now, the level of maturity that demands from us is going to, a lot of people are going to have, what's the word that I'm looking, growing pains. I just see, depending on what your background is or sort of what you're used to, you know, there's not going to be a person there to walk you along every step of the way. So now it's a lot of, you need to take the initiative. You know, you need to check your email. You need to open up the Carmen inbox and look at all that stuff. And so I think students that struggle with self-advocacy and accountability are going to have a hard time. And I think that as someone that works with students, that's going to have to be the priority, is instilling that sense of, you know, capability, and you have the tools, even if you don't know exactly what to do, we can sort of figure this out. And
Self-sufficient.
yes, thank you. And I think for some students, depending on what their background is, that's going to be very shocking for them. If they've had things sort of done for them in that way most of their life, it's a hard transition. And I think too, when I went to college, my dad never made it past 8th grade, and my mom did a vocational school to become a phlebotomist, so neither of them had any sort of experience with higher ed. So for me, it was pick up the phone, call, and figure it out. Like, go. They couldn't help me. They didn't know how. And I see that becoming more of the norm, students needing to be sort of that go-getter and that self-starter, because if you wait too long, especially now, that you won't have necessarily an orientation to go to have someone explain it to you, sort of thing. That makes sense.
Yeah. So from, that you've been here 4 years in Ohio, what do you feel Ohio is for you right now?
I think it's becoming a home. I think it's slowly becoming a home. I've really let my guard down in Columbus, and so I feel comfortable here finally. Like I've been used to moving so often.
You bought a house. So.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, that's permanency. I've lived out of, like my car, moving places and stuff. And, I'm going to get a studio apartment because I'm only going to be here for a while. So Columbus has really given me roots. And Ohio has given me roots again, it feels like. I had my roots in DR, and now I feel like I'm resettling somewhere else.
Are you involved in any Latino organizations?
I'm part of Ole here on campus, but I actually really do want to become more involved, and that's kind of been a little bit of a struggle for me because I don't really know where to start, and I feel almost dumb trying to reach out to other people to ask them. I don't know why. That's just, like, figure it out yourself sort of thing. But I would like to become more involved.
Belkis, I forgot to ask you this earlier. Your name.
Oh.
Before we end the interview, I wanted to ask you about that because I've met a couple people that are from the Dominican Republic, and their name was Belkis. And so I just wanted you, if you have any comment about that name.
Yes, actually, I had a conversation with my grandmother about it again recently. So my name, I'm the third Belkis in my family. So my grandmother's name is Belkis Yolanda. My aunt's name is Belkis Miguelina. And then I am Belkis Angelina. So from what my grandmother told me, my great-grandmother had a friend or an acquaintance who was named Belkis, and she was of Middle Eastern descent. And so at the time, the name was still popular in Dominican Republic. So my great-grandmother named my grandmother Belkis, and then the name just kind of stuck. A lot of the Belkises in my family have very assertive personalities, so it kind of became a running joke. And then I remember when I turned 15, we were on a cruise, and one of the waiters actually commented on my name, and he was from Turkey. And he let me know, he was, oh yeah, your name is Turkish, and it means a strong woman. It comes from the Bible. And I've done some research since then, and apparently it's another name for the Queen of Sheba in the Bible. And so it tends to mean like a strong-headed, stubborn woman. And anyone that I've met...
Una jefa.
Una jefa.
Sí.
Exacto. Any Belkis that I've met, though, has always been from Dominican Republic. I've never met a Belkis from anywhere else.
Well, thank you for that
No
history.
problem.
I thought it was interesting, the name
Thank you.
Belkis. Belkis, is there any thing you would like to add to this interview about yourself or your experience here in Ohio so far?
I think one of the main things that I enjoy and continue to enjoy about Ohio is it does remind me of Dominican Republic in the hospitality and the sort of humility. I think back to any time I've gone home and been in the airport or, just out in public, and people are just nice to each other. Help an old lady with her bag. It's an afterthought. You don't go out of your way, you just do it. And so I've noticed that here, specifically in Ohio. That's sort of, you see your neighbor doing something and you say, hey, how you doing? And that reminds me of DR, because that's how it is there. Whether you're friends with your neighbor or not, they're still going to, echarle el ojo a la casa while you're on vacation. And I've noticed that happens here. I didn't feel that when I lived in Orlando. I didn't feel that when I lived in some other places. And I feel that again here.
Well, Belkis, thank you so much for this interview.
No problem. Thank you for having me.